All right, well, we said it'll be a couple more minutes, and so that's been a couple of minutes. Want to say hi. Thanks for joining us this evening. This evening presentation for Shure Wireless Workbench is being presented tonight by CSMTAcademy. David Jordan from CSMT is working with us this evening to put this on so that you have an opportunity to learn more about Wireless Workbench from Shure. We're so glad to be with you. My name is Craig, and I'm joined by Michael Casey. We are the Florida representatives for Shure, and we are happy to be presenting this to you this evening. One of the things that I think is really great about Wireless Workbench is it's not just for Shure products, and so we're glad you're tuning in. There is a questions section there on your interface, or you can feel free to type in your questions as we go. We want to do our best to answer questions as we go, so we don't get too far past anything that you can. We get too far past what you're asking. So, want to make sure that you know that it's there. Feel free to type away if you have questions. We are recording this so that Dave can put this on the CSMTAcademy page, so you can watch it again later if there's something that you think you might have missed. But with that, I want to introduce you to Michael Casey. He is the technical specialist at Mainline Marketing in Orlando. And Michael comes to you this evening from our office there. He comes with a lot of experience, spent a number of years working for one of the major theme parks here in Orlando, and has a vast amount of experience with wireless products, both Shure and others. And so he comes with a lot of knowledge that he wants to pass on to you this evening. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Michael, it's all yours, brother.
Yep. Thanks, Craig. As Craig mentioned, my name is Michael Casey. I'm the technical specialist here at Mainline Marketing. We're the Florida Shure reps. And he mentioned I came from the theme park world. You know, over the course of my career, I just joined Mainline team last year. But over the course of my career, I've kind of touched every little market in the audio industry, between the theme parks, theater, did a little corporate AV, concerts. But I got my start in the church, volunteering for church in high school. So I definitely have a place in my heart for that, and I appreciate what the houses of worship bring to the table for the audio industry as far as production value. Today we're going to take a look at Shure's Wireless Workbench frequency coordination software. It's a free software. I'm going to start out with a little overview, just in case there's anybody here who's not real familiar with it. I'm going to talk about how to get it, how to get started with the workflow. And then we're going to try and get into some little tips and tricks for maybe if you have been using Workbench for a while, maybe some lesser known features and some newer features you may not be aware of. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll talk about how to get Wireless Workbench. If you open your favorite web browser, it's available for free on Shure.com. Quickest way to get it is just to Google Wireless Workbench. And first result, you see Wireless Workbench 6. We are currently on 6.12 or 6.13.2. Sorry. And you can see here we could download it for Mac and download it for 64-bit Windows. One other app while I'm in here I want to show you is we have an iOS app you may or may not be aware of. It's called Shure Plus Channels. And it's available in the App Store, but I'll show you just some screenshots here on the Shure website. Basically, if you're familiar with Wireless Workbench and you've already been using Wireless Workbench, you'll see a lot of the features from the Monitor tab come in here. You can monitor your RF and your audio channels. And there's an in-app purchase. I think it's only about $10 that will allow you to actually control. So the free version of the software, it's all available in the App Store. Free version will let you monitor and view all your wireless on the network. And the paid upgrade in-app purchase will allow you to control your devices via iPad or iPhone. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open up Wireless Workbench. And you can see here, it's automatically populated some things I have here on my local network in the inventory tab. And real quick before we get too deep, one thing I want to show you is the since we're not going to get too deep into the basic workflow of Workbench, on the YouTube, there is a Shure Performance and Production channel. They have a lot of great videos on getting started in wireless Workbench. So there's a playlist just for Workbench in there. So you can search in this playlist and see if you're brand new to wireless Workbench, you might want to come in here to Shure Performance and Production and dig in there. You'll find a playlist full of wireless Workbench videos, how to get started with your own workflow. So continuing on in the software, we have 3 tabs here: the inventory, frequency coordination, and monitor tab. So inventory is where we start out. We kind of populate what's in our rack, the gear that we have. We see it auto-populated, what I have connected to my network. If we're in offline, we can also add a new device. We can see there's multiple different manufacturers, even some of our competitors in here. And we can choose the manufacturer, whole list of model numbers. And all of these devices have profiles, RF profiles built into wireless Workbench. So then moving over here is a frequency coordination tab. And this is where we'll kind of plot our frequency spectrum at our show site, our venue. And we can bring in some different scan sources, scan data, and then wireless Workbench will calculate some good frequencies for us to use. And then lastly, over here in the monitor tab, this is kind of during service when we go live. This is what we'll want to take a look at. You can check these boxes over here. And it'll bring us little channel widgets for each of our devices to kind of monitor the RF, the audio, battery life, things like that. All right, so I'm going to show you a few new features. This 6.13.2 version of wireless Workbench just came out last month. And one of the good features in the frequency coordination tab, if you've been used to using the wireless frequency finder or using the database, the TV database in Workbench, you may have known that kind of last year and leading up to last year, it hasn't been the most accurate. Well, they kind of fixed the frequency finder at the beginning of this year, into last year. And just with this new release, they fixed the TV database. They changed who was hosting the database, and it's a lot more up to date, a lot more representative of the FCC repack that just happened. So that's good news. One other option or one other new feature is if I throw some channels in here, you can see, add some frequencies. You can see there's band overlays up here at the top. This is a new feature in this version. You can see I have G10 is my IAM, the PSM 1000 band, and G50 is my ULXD microphone band. So we can see band overlays on the spectrum. They kind of show us where on the graph that those frequencies fall. And over here on the right side, there's options where we can show and hide those band overlays. And there's also a few other overlays in here. There is over here on the right, if I scroll down, there's this new view intermodulation products. And what we can do is we can click and it'll show us the third order intermods. And it'll also show us 5th order, 7th, 9th, and 3 transmitter, 3rd order. So that's really useful. And we'll show one good use of that leading up in a few minutes about how that will become very useful. And the other overlay we have in our spectrum graph is here's all our microphone IEM frequencies up at the top represented by these flags. If I right click on those, there's the show spacing tab. And this will show us the channel spacing based on the RF profile in Workbench of channel to channel spacing. So if I zoom in, this is how far it wants to keep this channel away from any other channels or intermod products. And then we can also do intermod spacing, which is a little bit less. And then we can see at the 5th order or the 7th order, it starts to ignore intermod. So we can overlay our spacing, kind of see a visual representation of what it's trying to avoid. Together with the intermod products, we can really start to see what Workbench is kind of calculating in the background. That kind of saves us from doing a whole heck of a lot of math. All right, so I'm going to turn this off for the time being. And one feature that's not brand new in this version, but it was released, I believe, last year, is the advanced zone management. Prior to this release, which I believe was last summer, the RF zones, the way it worked, you could assign your microphones, your IEMs to an RF zone, and anything in the same zone would it would coordinate channel to channel spacing. So if you had a microphone on 471 megahertz, it would give 100 kilohertz of spacing before it put another microphone. But if it was in two different zones, it'd ignore intermod. So if there's a mic in zone A and a mic in zone B, it's going to assume that those mics aren't going to be close enough together, because remember, intermodulation is based on like physical proximity. So the closer your transmitters get, the more likely they're going to cause intermodulation together. So the zones before this version would basically ignore intermod products, but they would calculate for channel-to-channel direct interference. But now with the advanced zone management, I'm going to go ahead and add a zone in here. We'll call this main sanctuary. And let's do another one. We'll say school. And chapel. So we got 3 zones here. And if I go over here to this configure tab, now we can choose like per zone, how it's related to each other zone. We see by default, it's got kind of the legacy zone management where it reflects channel-to-channel spacing and ignores intermod. Let's say that the chapel and the main sanctuary are like, a mile apart, but the school's in between. So we know like chapel and main sanctuary, like we can literally put microphones on the same frequency and they won't matter. What we can do is over here in the main sanctuary chapel, we can just uncheck that box, and then now we'll have more frequency options available. This is really helpful, particularly if you're coordinating a large number of transmitters to kind of get some extra transmitters on the air. And the other thing we can do here is, say the chapel backs up to the main sanctuary, like the worship platform in the main sanctuary is like shares a wall with the worship platform and chapel. We could say we actually want to, ignore the, we want to pay attention to intermod products there. So I'll say channel spacing and also intermod. So that's a really cool feature if you want to get really granular, particularly if you have a big campus with lots and lots of channels. This could come in very handy to help you get some more transmitters on the air. And let's see. So back here in the inventory tab, we see how I have all my devices on the air, on my network, and I can add offline devices. Let's say Shure 8040, AAG57. We'll add 2 of those, and those aren't connected to my network, but I can go ahead and coordinate those offline. You can see these with my online devices. There's these shields that are kind of grayed out. This is a handy little feature, especially if you're dealing with volunteers and people with differing skill levels. Just a little lock parameter over here on the right tab. If I click one of these channels, over here on the right hand properties tab, I have different access control. I can click enabled and put in a pin 1, 2, 3, 4. You should make yours a little more secure than that. But apply that, we can see that they have these locks now, but they're green and they're unlocked. So right now, everything's unlocked and easily accessible. But if I wanted to, I could just click these shields and it locks everything up. And I'd have to know the pin to be able to get back into it. And you can get kind of granular with these. There's the lock state, which is basically what I just did, lock and unlock. Menu lock will lock the front panel on the receiver or a transmitter in the case of a PSM product. And you have gain lock, power lock. Power lock's really interesting because particularly on these these ULX D4s, for instance, they have a hard power switch on the back where the IEC cable plugs in, but there's kind of a soft power switch on the front, which is kind of a software shutdown. If I put power lock locked and somebody turns it off on the front switch, it'll stay on, and the menu screen will just flash locked so that they know what's going on there. They need a pin to get into it. And what you could do here is, you can even lock sync and scan. So if you wanted to, you could lock everything out except sync. So, all your frequencies in your rack are, locked out. But if somebody needs a new belt pack or something, they could walk up to the rack and sync it real quick. So that could be handy for prying hands. Go ahead and disable that for now. All right, so some things I want to show you on the frequency coordination tab. There's a few different ways to get some data into our spectrum to kind of show us what kind of RF spectrum we're dealing with in our venue. One of which is which is built right into Workbench software. It's TV channels. So down here in the bottom right section, there's this spectrum tab, and there's a TV channels list. So if I click this little gear icon, I can search by postal code. If I don't know the postal code, I can look it up here based on city and state. So I'm just going to put in my local postal code and leave it at a 50-mile radius. It will search for all the TV transmitters from the online database in my area. And we see it's checked all the TV transmitters that I need to be aware of. I click save, and now we can see those are all red now on my frequency plot. So that's one way to bring some information into your spectrum. Another way is scanning devices, any networked receivers from Shure, the ULXD, QLXD, Axient Digital. You can scan within their own bandwidth. So this ULXD is G50. So between 470 and 534, I could scan that whole spectrum and pick up what's in my spectrum in the area. The AXD 600 is pretty useful because it's a wideband device, so I can scan 470 to 952. So I'm going to go ahead and check that and say scan with one source. And it's going to start scanning my spectrum. And the cool thing we can look at here is kind of where the database lines up with what's actually on the air. Because we see I just put in my home zip code, and now I'm scanning what's actually on the air from home. And we can see that most of the TV channels are falling in line with the database pretty well. So that's good. Looks like the database is pretty well up to date. Looks like there might be one channel on 36 I didn't catch. So another lesser known fact is I have a PSM 1000 unit on the on my network. A cool feature I can do here is I can actually import a scan from a PSM 1000 belt pack. So the PTNR belt pack, what I've done ahead of time is I've gone into the RF menu on the belt pack, and there's a option to do a full RF scan, and I've done that. And then once you do that and you hit scan on the belt pack to go into channel scan mode, you can go over to the receiver and sync. It'll give you the option to download the spectrum, basically. So once you do that and download the spectrum to the P10T in your rack, you can come over here to scan data, and there's this button that says import. I'll say import from hardware. And in this drop-down list, there's a P10T. So if I click import, it should bring in a scan of the spectrum within which my PSM 1000 operates. And we can see that it's a pretty close representation to what the AXD 600 is doing in the background. Another way you can bring in some devices or bring in some scan data is to import from a file. So I just imported from hardware, which was, there's a couple devices. The AXD 600 can store scans in the hardware, and the P10T can also do that. I can pull in data from a file. So this can be either a Workbench file, which we see this as a scan SDB2 file, which is something I've done in Workbench. And then we can see this one's dated February, so we'll see how it lines up. And we can see it's pretty close to what we have today. And so that's a file. That's a SDB2 file. That's a file I scanned within Workbench. If you do not have a Shure device to scan with, say you have like an RF Explorer or something like that, within like the RF Explorer software, and I believe the same with like Vantage and Touchtone, you can export a CSV file. And real quick, let me just open the CSV. And most of the software, I know at least the RF Explorer app will ask you, what format you want your CSV in, and it will give you the option to put it in a wireless workbench format. So it'll go ahead and give you a CSV file that looks like this. It'll be frequency in one column. Well, this is how Excel does it, but it'll be frequency, comma, and then your dBm value followed by a line break. So this was done with the RF Explorer handheld with the RF Explorer software. Exported a CSV. Now I can bring that, my import file, I can bring that into Wireless Workbench. Let's see how that lines up. So now I've got several scans all overlaid to see how they all compare. And we can see it looks like in the background there may be a TV channel that was still on the air. This was October, so it might have gone off the air since that scan. This was also done in Winter Park, which is about 20 miles from here. So it could be a geographical difference, or it could be that this channel's off the air now. But we can check and uncheck just to kind of compare our scans. So once we have, we have TV database, we have scan files, we've got a pretty good idea of what kind of spectrum we're working with. And I'm just going to go ahead and unselect this RF Explorer one because I think that's showing us a little bit of irrelevant stuff in here. May have been a gain structure issue. We can see there's a lot of stuff above this red line, which is our exclusion threshold. So one thing about the exclusion threshold, by default, is set to 85 dBm. And so this is the exclusion threshold. If anything goes above this with a certain amount of bandwidth, it will be excluded. And you can note that by this blue block here, that's an exclusion. Wireless Workbench won't coordinate anything on top of that frequency. If anything with a certain amount of bandwidth reaches above this orange line, which is called the inclusion threshold, Workbench treats it like a device. So anything above the red, it kind of treats like noise floor that you should stay away from. Anything above the orange, it treats as like a device that's in your venue. And let's see if it gave us, these, it'll come up with a little diamond here. We can see the leading edge of this TV station, it recorded as a device. So if I click this diamond up here, and there's 4 different profiles that I can change it to. By default, it makes it a generic device, IMD wideband. So it's considering a wideband device, basically like an FM modulated device, and it's accounting for intermodulation. So basically what this does is this treats it like it's another microphone on the air, or treats it like it's another in-ears or intercom, something in my room that I need to stay away from, and I also need to be courteous to. So it's going to look out for intermodulation from this device, and it's going to keep our own intermodulation away from this device. So if I click generic device, no IMD, it's going to basically ignore the IMD, but it won't put anything right on top of that. It's going to consider that this device doesn't create any IMD. So generic exclusion would basically be like anything that just comes above this red line. It's just going to stay away from that specific frequency. So we have an IMD and no IMD option. So the exclusion, it would stay away from that, plus consider IMD. And then no IMD, it would just stay away from that exact frequency. So by default, anything above this inclusion threshold, it creates a generic device and it accounts for IMD. Anything above this exclusion threshold, it just kind of stays away from that exact frequency. So now that we got our spectrum kind of laid out, what I'm going to do is over here and add frequencies. We'll go and pull my frequencies from my inventory and say all frequencies from the inventory. Oh, I see. I set up zones and I'm selected in a chapel zone, but everything's still in default. So when I go back to default, everything's actually already in my coordination space. So to add something to a zone, we can either right click on the device header, which is this PSM 1000. I'll right click there and I can say move to RF zone. So we'll put those in the main sanctuary. And now we see over here, main sanctuary, there's 0 out of 2 devices coordinated. And then back in default, ULXD, we'll say those are in my main sanctuary as well. And I'm going to say that this Accent Digital is over in my school. So if I go to main sanctuary, it'll give me all those devices. And if I hit calculate, it will give me good frequencies for those devices based upon the default profiles. One thing, if you haven't seen, it's kind of cool to look at, is if you click the header of a device in your inventory list here in Frequency Coordination tab. Over here on the right is a Compatibility tab. You have a standard, robust, and more frequencies. You can kind of choose, if you need to get more frequencies on the air and you're not as worried about those like money mics or anything, you could choose more frequencies. You can see it just starts to ignore third order intermods, 3 transmitter third orders. And if we go to robust, it gets a little more strict about intermods. So 2 transmitter third order is 275 spacing, and then 3 transmitter is 100 kilohertz, whereas standard, we have 250 kilohertz spacing. So it's kind of middle of the road. And then more frequencies ignores the 3 transmitter intermod. So there's default profiles for all the devices in the Wireless Workbench database, and you can also create some user profiles if you need to. So now that we've calculated some frequencies, I'm just going to run that again, and we can see all these green frequencies. It said we're good to go on air. And if I go to assign and deploy, it's going to give me main sanctuary. It's going to kind of give me some star rankings. A lot of people will kind of get hung up on this and, say we have to have 3 stars. It's good to just kind of look at the dBm values. Anything, 90 dBm and above is pretty much golden in my eyes. But what you could do here is kind of just drag them around and decide which frequencies you want to which channels. And then we can deploy. So now I just send all those frequencies to my racks, to my PSM 1000 rack and my ULXD. One thing to note about this ranking, the star ranking, since a lot of people get hung up on it, if you change, say I drag this exclusion threshold really high, and I go back to assign and deploy, it should give me some better. See, we all got 3 stars now. So it's kind of based on what parameters you got going on here. I wouldn't get too hung up on the stars. Maybe a 1 star might be something to stay away from. But generally, if your dBm values are like 90 and above, you're good. We got any questions coming in yet, Craig?
You're doing a great job. There are no questions.
Look at that. Confused them really bad.
I'll just remind you, the folks, there is a question section there in your interface. If you click on that, you want to type in some questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Michael is an expert at this program, and so if there's something that he's presented that you'd like just to have us drill down a little bit, feel free to ask questions. That's why we're here.
I know everything except what I don't know.
That's everything, I think.
I don't know about that. One thing I do want to show you is inclusion groups. I said we could look at some inclusion groups. So I'm going to go ahead and get these G57s out of my workspace real quick. Simplify this. And I'm going to hide some of these things. Nice. All right, bring my frequencies back in. All right, we can see I have G10, which is my PSM 1000, my in-ear monitor range, and G50, which is my microphone range. One thing that's a kind of a common practice, and I think is a good practice, is to kind of separate our wireless mics and our wireless in-ear monitors. And reason being is, let me get rid of some of this scan data. If I show the Intermod products again, we can see the first, the third order intermod here kind of gives us a spread, and it'll be the kind of this tapered off skirt as we move farther out. So our intermod products kind of venture outside of the band that we're working in. So we're only working in this band right here, but you can see our possible intermods venture way outside of that. One thing we could do, and usually, most of the time you're just going to be looking at 2 transmitter third order. Those are the ones most likely to give you issues. And keep in mind, it's all based on proximity of the transmitters. That's kind of why you see at some award shows and other big shows, there's a lot of turkey bins backstage, the aluminum baking pans that they put all the mics in, is because having all those mics within close proximity to each other is a recipe for intermod. And so they're trying to isolate them as much as possible from each other. But one thing we could do here is separate our in-ear monitors and our wireless mics. We can see these 2 bands are kind of overlapped. One way we could do that, if we had a perfectly clear spectrum at our venue and our location, we can, we could get a G10 and we could get like a H50, and it would be completely separate. So H50 would be like up here, and we could be completely separate frequency bands, and they'd be separated just by default based on what frequency bands they're capable of tuning to. But we can see here we have overlapping bands with our mics and IEMs. What I can do, since G7 is kind of extends a little higher than my microphones, I'm going to go ahead over here in the Spectrum tab down here in the bottom right. There's this list that says inclusions. So I'll click the gear there. And at the bottom, we see inclusions list. Say account for inclusions list. And we don't have any lists yet, so I'll click manage. And this is kind of basically just a hierarchy of lists and groups. So list is basically a group of groups, and then within the groups, we tell it what frequency ranges we want it to be able to tune to. So I'll create a list, and you can only work with one list at a time in Workbench, but you can put multiple groups in that list. So I'll just leave it list 1 for now. And then groups, we'll call it IEMs. And we'll add another one and call that microphones. So the IEMs, we'll start with the microphones. They both start at 470. So I'll add a range here. And we can select a range or a specific single frequency. I'm going to do a range, and we're going to start at 470. And let's say we go up to about 510. And then IEMs, we'll leave a little gap after 510. Maybe go to 520 to 542. So what that's going to do is, once we assign our IEMs to this IEM group and our microphones to this microphone group, it's going to limit these to this range of frequencies. Even though the device itself is capable of tuning, 470 to 542, it's only going to put it in this range we told it to go in, which is going to keep our IEMs and our microphones separate. So I'll click save. And we can see our 2 ranges there. So let's add some frequencies back. Default. And if I right click on the header again, PSM 1000, move to inclusion group. I'm going to put that in IEMs and move to inclusion group microphones. And when I calculate, it should keep all my mics in this range and all my IEMs in this range. And let me I'll delete the microphones real quick to kind of show you the intermod. So we can see right now with these 2 mic spaces far apart. Calculate that again. You see the intermod products and where they land. So we can see the closer our grouping is of these 2 PSM transmitters, the more likely they're going to be out of this range we've set for our microphones. So if we leave them there, analyze, it doesn't like that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my group a little smaller. Since I only have 2 transmitters, I'm going to make my inclusion group a little bit smaller for my PSMs. Oops, wrong tab. So IEMs, we'll start this at say 526. And then we'll add our microphones back in there. And calculate. Oh, it took them out of the group. So we'll put those in the inclusion group, microphones. So there we can see it's just going to space them out and give us kind of a little gap between where our microphones sit and our IEMs. Still no questions, huh?
So yeah, we do actually have a question about setting up microphones that aren't Shure networked microphones. I mean, obviously what we're showing folks is how simple it is with network devices, but why don't you go ahead and show them how to set up specifically devices that aren't Shure. The question says, you know, that the full experience is obviously best with the Shure devices, but what about a local band with each member who bought some random brand in a random frequency? So yeah, go ahead and show them how you set up another manufacturer's microphone into your inventory.
So I'm going to show you one way, which might be a little lesser known first, and then I'll show you the more the easier way if you know up front what you're dealing with. So the lesser known way would be if we did a scan in Wireless Workbench, you know, assigned a device, generic device here. Say it just had one little peak here, and we knew, oh, that's our comm. We forgot to put that in. We can go in here and change the profile and say custom profile, and it will bring up this manufacturer's list. And we can either do generic and kind of make our own profile, or say we have like an old legacy like BTR comm. We could say, you know, that's a BTR base station. And the other way to do it, if we already know what we're dealing with in our planning stages. So this will show you, you know, basically if it's on the air and it's transmitting when you do a scan, it'll pop in here and you could just change the profile. The other way is you can add it into your inventory offline. And if say I add a new device, we'll go in here, you know, we'll choose a you know, BTR 800 base station. We'll say we'll add that. That adds 2 channels, and then obviously we're going to have some belt packs with that. So we have 4 belt packs. Add those in there. So now we bring all our back in our frequency coordination tab. We bring all our inventory in to our workspace. It will also have our BTRs in there, and then when we calculate, it'll give us frequencies for those as well. And those were not analyzed for some reason. Because it's an illegal band. So that's a legacy illegal band, so it's not going to give you frequencies for those. Smart. But if it's legal, basically you can see here's our belt pack frequencies. Down here, compatible. It gives you 4 frequencies, and obviously it's not networked and it's not a Shure device. So you'll have to kind of write down these frequencies, or you can export a coordination report. Right here, create coordination report, and it'll export a PDF of all these frequencies, and you know, just go to your rack and punch in the frequency.
Hey Casey, can you bring up the database again of available devices, just so that they can see kind of how many different manufacturers are in there? Obviously not every manufacturer under the sun is in there, but it's a significant amount of products that are on the market today that you have to pick from to set them up.
We've got all the Shure devices, even discontinued stuff. You know, we have you know, PSM 600s, you know, if you're still lugging those around. If you know, some AKG, Anchor Audio, Audio Technica Audix, Electro Voice, HME, they make some intercoms, Lectrosonics. radioactive design. They got VHF and UHF intercoms. Sennheiser, don't use any of those. Those are bad. And Telex intercoms as well. So these are all what's in here by default.
Of course, you're kidding about Sennheiser.
Yeah, of course. I have to be biased. I'm paid to be biased. They make a great product.
Yeah, so you're
Sure makes a
seeing on
better
there to answer the question, even further. So yes, if they're not on that list, Michael showed you the very first thing there was you can see if you turn the transmitter on and run a scan, you can see a brand that's not on there, and you can flag them in your plot as to what that is, and give yourself a notation of, oh yeah, that's the Airwave, whatever the model is. You can flag it for yourself.
And this is another good reason to keep on top of updates. They're always coming out. There's several updates a year with Wireless Workbench, and one of the things that they're continuously updating is this, inventory database, this profiles. So any new products, new
there is another question on there about sound tech in a venue where cover bands come in with illegal frequencies and device. Can we override the smart feature to not coordinate out of bound frequency ranges?
Override the smart feature.
So you had said before that that it wouldn't coordinate that because it's in 600 megahertz or 700 megahertz.
Right.
I mean, we all know that people do show up out of bounds, obviously, and certainly our response to that is don't use those mics. And truthfully, as the cell phone towers get fired up, those older microphones that are out of bounds, they just won't work anymore because the cell phone tower is going to overpower the the small little transmitter of a wireless microphone.
Yeah, that's the thing is, anything that's illegal, it's going to be more in your best interest to avoid that, because it's going to cause you a lot more problems than it causes, Verizon or a TV station or anything like that, because they have their transmitters are in hundreds of kilowatts, if not megawatts. But yeah, no, as far as I know, there's not a way to override that. Even if there was, I probably wouldn't be allowed to tell you.
Yeah, it really is not a good scene to be using illegal stuff at this point, because it's gonna cause your show to have more problems than it's worth to carry around spend a couple $100 to get a new microphone.
Now, if there's something on the air and you scan and it's there in a range that you're not allowed to tune to, it will pick that up as a generic device. We can see this TV station here is up at about 630. So we can't tune a mic there, but it's going to pick it up and it's going to create a generic device, and it's going to keep us away from intermod that's going to cause us interference. But we won't be able to calculate a frequency for any of those ranges.
So we're coming up on the about 1 hour mark here in a couple more minutes. Casey, you got some more things you want to show, or you want to just leave it open for more questions?
I mean, I'll take some more questions if you guys got them.
See if any more pop in here.
One thing, if there's any Axient Digital users out there, one thing I hear a lot of gripes about is all the alerts that come up. And just in case you're not aware, you can, choose what you get alerted by here. In the if you go to Tools Preferences, there's this Alerts tab. You can kind of choose, okay, I don't want a low battery. I don't want all this, popping up on my screen every time it comes up. I know a lot of people kind of get annoyed how many times they get alerts from Axient Digital if there's, interference or whatnot. But if you don't want those alerts, most of them are a good idea to be aware of. But if you don't want those crowding up your screen, you can pick and choose what you see here. Another cool feature, once you go into show, so there's this monitor tab here, where we can monitor each channel and the RF on each channel and how good our RF and audio is looking, battery life, things like that. There's also a timeline. So up here on the top, this will pop open a new window, and we can select any of our channels, and it'll kind of give us a timeline of when that transmitter was on, what the reception was like. So if we start this at the beginning of a service, you can run it in the background the whole time. If you look up here in the right, you can see that it really doesn't need much data at all. It has 20,000 weeks remaining worth of data that it can store. So I think that'll outlast me. But if you start this before your service, kind of keep it running in the background. If you're mixing in front of house, you hear some little dropout, you can go back to the timeline later. If you know kind of what time that was that you had a dropout, you can go and see, was it a dropout, kind of troubleshoot. Maybe it wasn't RF, maybe it was, somebody made a noise on the mic. Maybe it was a, digital like Dante glitch or something like that. But it'll give you a timeline from when you start to when you stop of RF levels, audio levels, things like that.
Well, cool, man. If that's what you had for us this evening, we're really honored that Dave would have us come on here and give this presentation tonight. If you found this to be useful for you, certainly reach out to Dave at CSMTAcademy and let him know that he's on to something here with these classes that are available through the Facebook page, CSMTAcademy. We're here in Orlando with Dave, but we could obviously have a reach that goes much farther than that, and so we're happy to keep presenting these things if it's something that you find useful. And I know that Dave has lots of connections out there that he can certainly bring in more training like this as needed. So we thank you for coming on. Michael Casey has his email address up there on the screen, and he's certainly willing to answer any questions you might have if you need some more help. It would be our pleasure to help you out with any Shure products, or if you have questions specifically about Wireless Workbench, we'd love the privilege to just share some more of the information that we have with you. Thank you for tuning in, and it has again been a pleasure. Thanks CSMTAcademy for having us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks everyone.